Streaming now, this is the Wood TV Live Desk.
And good afternoon, everyone. Phil Pinarski here with the Wood TV Live Desk. Hope you're all having a great start to your Wednesday. Joining us today is News 8's very own digital reporter, Matt Jarowski, who has just put out the first installment of his new Black History Month series, which takes a deeper dive and looks at the issue of redlining here in Grand Rapids. Matt, thank you so much for being here today.
Hey Phil, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, and this is the first story in a four-part series that will be released every Sunday on woodtv.com during the month of February. And after these stories, Matt will be joining us right here on the live desk again to kind of explain them further, and we can talk a little bit more about them, maybe some of the things that didn't get into these stories, and just kind of hear more about his process. So Matt, first off, getting started here, the topic, redlining, can you maybe touch on that a little bit more? Maybe there are some people at home that are watching that don't really understand that term. If you could just explain that real quickly for us.
Sure. So redlining is a bit of a complicated process. It's something that came out of the HOLC, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which was a New Deal program back in the 30s after the Great Depression. The first piece kind of focused on how redlining was developed and then what happened. So after a few years of helping the banks pick up the pieces out of the Great Depression and providing mortgages for people, the HOLC went back, tried to look at how we can make our investments for our banks safer. So they looked at, they basically carved up all sorts of different cities all across the country. Grand Rapids was one of them. There were 10 total in Michigan. And they would make these little neighborhoods based on property values and how old the homes are and all these other things, and graded them based on these will be sound investments going forward, these ones have more risk. But the grading system that was put in place also had a lot of other racial tones to it. They measured specifically whether there were any black residents in that neighborhood or any foreign-born families or people on welfare. Those were three of the big grading points. It really impacted the black community specifically, not solely the black community, but them specifically, limiting them basically to certain neighborhoods across the city, neighborhoods with properties that were much older, needed a lot more work. And we get into all sorts of other issues of how redlining went deeper than that. And really, the redlining was banned by the Civil Rights Act in 1968, but even still today, we can see the impact of redlining and how that shaped the city.
Right, absolutely. And of course, that story, went into a bunch of topics, and just in that first installment of this series, and it's, you can find it right now live on woodtv.com. But Matt, specifically this topic of redlining, why did you think that this was something important that had to be discussed, not only in just one story during Black History Month, but in a four-part series? What was your reasoning behind choosing this topic?
Honestly, it was interesting to me. Growing up, I was born and raised here in Grand Rapids, and it's not that I'm a history buff by any means, but I always take a second look at some of these stories where I grew up learning about this city, and when I come across things I didn't know or things I didn't learn in school, some of those things take me by surprise, and this was one of them. I didn't know about redlining until, years after I graduated high school and college and grad school and all those things. So when I came across the topic, I felt that it was something that was worth reporting on. If there's something that I don't know about, or people in my community weren't necessarily exposed to, then chances are a lot of other people don't know about it as well. So that was really my big motivation for wanting to explore a really upsetting topic at times, but also interesting and important.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you touched on a little bit about seeking out stuff that maybe you aren't familiar with, something maybe that you want to learn more about. Was there anything that surprised you during doing research for this story or for this series, the planning, or even while you were writing? Anything really jump out to you?
Some of the nakedness of the bigotry. I mean, I guess when you take a step back and you look at the time frame where the map, the redlining map for Grand Rapids was released in 1937. So that's the time frame we're dealing with. It is jarring in some ways to see a government form that just blatantly says like, oh, well, this neighborhood is going to get a D grade because there are their term Negroes, which is something that we just don't use or see nowadays. Seeing that stuff really stands out. And then there are a couple of quotes. I've talked to a couple of historians, read a couple of books. One of them is Dr. Randall Jelks, who was a longtime professor at now Calvin University, and now he teaches at Kansas University. In his book, kind of detailing it's called African Americans in the Furniture City. One of his quotes that stood out to me was, "We see the naked bigotry in that time, and even on these redline forms." But for Grand Rapids specifically, a lot of it was kind of baked into how the community operated and into discussions or concepts. He mentioned freedom of association and free enterprise. That was one of the big things where it was kind of used as an excuse to discriminate. In his book, he talked about the furniture industry and how as big of a role that played in Grand Rapids through the city's development through the late 19th century and through the 1930s. Grand Rapids black population really played no role in that. They just simply weren't employed there. I want to say it's the president of the American Seating Company, one of the largest companies in the city, responded to those claims. He said that they don't have a discriminatory hiring process. It's that there just weren't any adequate black employees who applied. Obviously, we know that now that doesn't have a whole lot of merit. We also know that, let's just move past that. I don't have the facts in front of me, so I don't want to say anything out of turn.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, the fact that they didn't have any black employees in a company that was more than 1,000 people
Mm-hmm.
certainly says something at the time.
Right, and just kind of seeing it laid out there in front of you, I'm sure, caught you off by surprise. I mean, we've heard stories about a whole bunch of segregation issues across this country for so long, but just kind of seeing that out in front of you on a story you're working on, I'm sure it can just be very jarring. Once again, Phil Penarski here with the Wood TV Live Desk, being joined by News 8's digital reporter Matt Jarowski as he's explaining, going a little bit further, more past the byline, into his redlining series as part of Black History Month here on woodtv.com. Matt, before we let you go, though, this is just the first part of a 4-part series. We'd love to hear maybe a little bit of a sneak peek of what you've got planned to release this coming Sunday.
Sure. So the first piece, we kind of just walk through redlining and what it is and the history of it. The second part is looking at the 1937 map, how Grand Rapids was not to say that Grand Rapids was segregated solely by the map, it certainly was before that, but how the maps made things worse and how the maps shaped the city in 1937 and how we can still see those things today. So we're dissecting through all the demographics and the data, even that today where we can still see segregated areas where minorities are virtually not there, or then we have neighborhoods that are almost exclusively people of color. And then all the data that goes beyond that as far as property values or environmental issues, health issues, that kind of thing. Things that really play a role in people's everyday lives still. Mm-hmm. So that will be Sunday's piece.
Yes, now well, we're looking forward to checking that one out. And Matt will, of course, be joining us back here on the live desk next Thursday as well, as we sort of discuss that piece a little bit more in depth. Matt, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to stop by the live desk.
My pleasure, Phil. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And we want to thank everybody else for tuning in to this latest edition of the Wood TV Live Desk. I'm Phil Penarski, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.